Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's really great to be here for the sixth event in the Trans-inclusivity Seminar Series, organised by Simon Yu, the Institute of Education's LGBTQ Equality Lead, and the Seminar Series coordinator. So this has been organised by Simon and the committee, who's a group of academics working at the IOE, who are all committed to LGBTQ justice, including trans justice. And I'd really like to thank Simon for inviting me today to chair this talk, which is going to be given by Dr. Kata Kyrola. So my name is Martin Oliver. I'm a professor at the London Knowledge Lab, which is part of the Institute of Education, and I use he, him pronouns. Until January, I was the Pro-Director for Academic Development at the IOE, so I'm really pleased to see not only has this seminar series been established, but it's just lovely. It's such brilliant work, it's such exciting ideas, it's such important conversations, and it's going from strength to strength. So well done to everyone who's been involved. Before we get started, Simon and our guest of honour, Arthur Davis, is going to say a few words. I understand that Kyla Thompson is also going to join us today as a guest of honour, but that they're unwell, so I hope you'll join me in wishing them well again soon. But for now, over to Simon.
Okay, right. Thank you, Martin. Okay, so I don't have very much to say. It's just hi, thank you for coming to this event as well. I've been really happy with people coming along to the event, the reactions to it. I think it's been great for the LGBTQ plus community, particularly the trans and non-binary community. So I'm just very happy with it. To honest, that's all I really have to say about it. Thank you very much for that, Martin. Okay, right.
And would you want to come and say a few words?
Hi everyone, I'm Arthur, they them pronouns, despite the beard. And which, is I feel the need to say that because, sometimes it feels like there are certain sort of markers for, oh, you're not non-binary unless you kind of, I don't know, dress like this or whatever. But I think hopefully something that we're going to shine a bit more of a light on throughout the seminar series is all the different interlocking external and internal kind of differences that we can experience and how we navigate maybe the gap between what other people see and how we feel inside, and the kind of things that we can do as an institution. Obviously, probably not going to come as a surprise to say that there's a lot of people that feel that the institutions around us are feeling increasingly unsafe as places to be queer, and I'm sure we can touch on that in the presentations to come. I'm really looking forward to speaking a little bit more about that actually next Thursday at the researcher panel. But for today, I'm really looking forward to hearing what Kata has to say. So I'll pass over to you.
But before we start, just a few procedural. Sorry, did you want to?
Are you mic'd up?
No, yeah, I can hear. Test it out.
We
right,
can
okay.
advise if we mic up, then it'll interfere with the other mics in the room and cause some feedback. So
Okay, it's just the aircon seems
yeah,
really loud.
I'll try and project.
No, it's fine. Absolutely fine.
Just as a few sort of procedural points, as a general safety announcement, if there is a fire alarm, could all of you please follow the event facilitators who will lead us out to the nearest fire exit and to the assembly point. Toilets, there are a range of toilet options available. Signs have been put up indicating gender inclusive toilet facilities. But if you have any questions, you can ask the facilitators who will lead you to somewhere appropriate. Questions after the talk. Online participants can send in their questions using the website slido.com. If you're going to put questions on the Slido website, please use the code #transonline. As a reminder to everyone, we will not be using the Teams chat to monitor questions, so we won't be checking the questions on the Teams chat, only on the Slido website. For participants in the room, you'll be able to ask questions directly, but if you prefer to ask questions anonymously, you can also use the Slido website. As with all the events in this series, as you're considering questions, please note our priority is to keep the conversation respectful and safe for everybody in the room and to everyone online, but in particular queer, trans and gender non-conforming participants. So we encourage academic engagement with the issues that Kata is going to raise, and would ask everyone to avoid person-oriented critiques or questions. Given the topic of the talk, I don't think it'd be any surprise that there will be things referred to which may be distressing, especially to queer, trans or gender non-conforming people mentioned in the talk. If at any point anyone wants to take a moment to themselves, please feel free to sort of leave the room and you rejoin us as and when you're ready to do so. I think that covers all the procedural points, and I will briefly introduce Kata. Kata is a media and cultural studies scholar who specialises in feminist, queer, decolonial, and critical race studies of popular culture. The co-edited book, The Power of Vulnerability, Mobilising Affect in Feminist, Queer and Anti-Racist Media Cultures, explores some of the issues which can be touched on in today's talk, including questions of affect and power and the ways that feelings, sensation, and intensities attach us to media images, to technologies, to structures of marginalisation, and to hopes for new kinds of worlds. I really do recommend the book to you. If you haven't read it, I mean, it's got a really engaging and wonderfully scholarly theorisation of the idea of vulnerability, which is going to be picked up on in the talk today. And it includes a really thoughtful and nuanced chapter about the links between vulnerability and trigger warnings. So if you haven't read it, it's available open access, so it's open to everyone. Please do have a read of it. It's really good stuff. Kata is also a member of UCL's LGBTQ Equality Steering Group, and also the IOE's LGBTQ Advisory Group, which Simon set up. So I'd like you all to join me in welcoming Kata.
Screen. So thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Martin, and the book recommendation. Thanks, Arthur. I look forward to next week's event. And thank you, Simon, for organizing this talk series on trans-inclusive scholarship. It's been such an important and uplifting space for all of this spring, and it's an honor to participate in this second to last event of the series. And hi, online participants. So in today's talk, I examine the effective contagiousness of so-called cancel culture as this figure travels and mutates across various contexts and political purposes. I want to trace these contagions from grassroots feminist, queer, trans, and Black activist calls for accountability to getting weaponized by right-wing media, and then how practices of cancellation seep back into marginalized communities, happening also within them. And it is this last context that I want to focus on today, instances where members of trans and queer communities online cancel other members of the same community, taking as an example the cancellation of trans YouTuber ContraPoints, who you can see there on the left-hand side of the slide. Now, this is a research topic that I'm only in the process of developing, and I haven't published anything on it yet, so it's work in progress. But for a long time, I have been researching the politics and the pedagogies of so-called bad feeling in the media. Why and how certain bodies, people, cultural phenomena, or media products become bad objects, deemed dangerous, harmful, or triggering, or today, perhaps in need of cancellation. I've also been interested in how different understandings of vulnerability play out in sometimes paradoxical ways in such discourses of danger and harm. But my interest also derives from a personal level. By now, I have witnessed many smaller and larger scale intra-community cancellations in various forms. And when I say community, I mean my community. I mean queer, trans, and feminist communities. Every time it happens, it feels heartbreaking, even when it's not happening to me directly. So heartbreaking that sometimes the only way to talk about it is through memes and really pitch black humor. I've also witnessed massive pylons, huge amounts of transphobic, sexist, racist, or anti-Palestine hate speech being spewed on individuals on social media. And I'm sure you can relate that it can make you feel really terrified and powerless, like we are all witnessing forces that are out of control, thus the term contagion. However, these instances are rarely called cancel culture, although they do often have the effect of scaring people off public platforms. I have to admit that I have also participated in some forms of cancellation, or things that might be understood as cancellation, such as participating in the boycott, divest, and sanction movement, boycotting Israeli products. And when I've stopped citing a scholar whose work I may have once found inspirational, but then found out that they said or did something deeply problematic. But is this cancellation? Why or why not would it count as such? So my aim in interrogating how and why cancellations happen within social justice-oriented communities, in particular queer and trans online communities, is not to say that these communities, my communities, would be somehow extraordinarily quarrelsome or toxic. Not at all. Quite the contrary. As Andrei Cavalcante has argued in his book, Struggling for the Ordinary, Media and Transgender Belonging in Everyday Life, his in-depth interviews with transgender people reveal what many of us also already know, that digital communities are lifelines. They are key care structures for queer, trans, and gender diverse people. These are communities that we go for comfort, for connection, for information, for hope, for exploration, especially if our offline everyday surroundings are not quite accommodating for such exploration. But these communities are, for better or for worse, also embedded in the world at large. And here, I'm inspired by Jose Esteban Muñoz's thoughts on queer world making, how queer world making practices and performance disassemble the majoritarian public sphere and use its parts to build an alternate reality. But what about instances where too much of the majoritarian public sphere feeds into queer worlds? What if queer worlds and the majoritarian public sphere start mirroring each other? I'm driven by a longing to understand why and how such powerful spaces of care may start fragmenting. And this longing to understand is, of course, driven by a longing to find out how we could keep our communities of care functional and vibrant. So with that foregrounding, let's move on to unpacking the notion of cancel culture. And here is my quick and dirty summary of key contexts or contagions of cancel culture circulating right now. First of all, cancellation can refer to the grassroots activist practice on and off social media that is often driven by members of marginalized communities. A practice of critiquing and boycotting influential people, companies, institutions, or governments who say or do something considered destructive, offensive, or abusive, and who seem to otherwise escape accountability. This understanding of cancellation is often traced back to the notion of the call-out, which, according to Meredith Clark, originated from Black Twitter in the early 2010s. As Andre Brock writes in his book, Distributed Blackness, Black women's call-out practices on early Black Twitter were already then accused of mob mentality and demonization of individuals rather than seen as critiques of systemic inequality. We can trace the gradual fading of the language of the call-out and the mainstream emergence of the language of cancellation to the late 2010s, when collective social media action created very real social transformation, such as with the Me Too and Black Lives Matter movements. Notably, already in these early years, just like today, the phrase "you're cancelled" was also used jokingly, as it took on a life of its own on the internet. And internet is all about irony. According to Eve Eng, in her 2022 book, Cancel Culture, the Me Too movement turbocharged cancel culture, which has since evolved into more troubling forms, where a sense of scale disappears and an activist who made a single dubious post years ago is treated the same way as known and convicted sexual offenders, like the movie producer Harvey Weinstein or comedian Bill Cosby. And here, just to lighten things up, is a little GIF about cancel culture. And with the cast of Seinfeld, a sitcom show from the 1990s that some of you are probably too young to have heard about. Anyhow, the second practice of using the notion of cancel culture is its weaponization by right-wing politicians, anti-gender and trans-exclusionary feminist movements, powerful people like Donald Trump, or whole governments, to dismiss critiques as witch hunts, attacks on freedom of speech, or attacks on freedom to defend oneself. The paradox is that these complaints about being attacked, silenced, and deplatformed are often given very public platforms. This has led to a situation where one of the key issues that maybe are driving support for the trans-exclusionary feminist movement in the UK is, paradoxically, their very visible claims of being under aggressive deplatforming by queer and trans feminist activists. Indeed, nobody even knew who many of these trans-exclusionary feminists are before they were quote-unquote cancelled. Now, claims to voice through claims of victimhood and vulnerability are nothing new, just like the practice of grassroots boycotting is nothing new. Already in 1983, feminist scholar Marilyn Frye stated in an essay called Oppression, and I quote, "Human beings can be miserable without being oppressed, and it is perfectly consistent to deny that a person or group is oppressed without denying that they have feelings or that they suffer." This was Frye's response to anti-feminist critics who argued that women are not particularly oppressed because everyone suffers. In 1997, Lauren Berlant analyzed the emergence of so-called victims, privileged subjects who adopt the language of injury from radical social justice movements, while claiming that they are injured by these very movements and the societal changes they demand. In Berlant's words, the public rhetoric of citizen trauma has become so pervasive and competitive that it obscures basic differences among modes of identity, hierarchy, and violence. End of quote. In this appropriation of language of vulnerability, boundaries between those who are injurable and those systematically injured are blurred. Here we can think of, for example, the question of gender-segregated toilets. Trans-exclusionary feminists claim that the very presence of trans women in the same space makes cis women injurable, when in fact it is trans women who regularly experience verbal and physical harassment in bathrooms. The notion of citizen victims was also a key starting point for the book that I edited together with Anu Koivunen and Ingrid Ruberi in 2018. not that old, called The Power of Vulnerability, where we analyzed the emergence of a historically grounded but partly new language of vulnerability, where vulnerability paradoxically becomes a claim to power. This dynamic is not only visible in privileged subjects' complaints about being cancelled, but it is also visible in discourses within gender studies, within activist communities. For example, in long debates on who can and should speak for or about which marginalized groups and how. In this dynamic, the politics of vulnerability may sometimes even look like a competition between disadvantaged groups about who is more or more severely marginalized. Now, in a cultural atmosphere where claims of vulnerability can translate to agency and voice, it shouldn't come as a surprise that we're also witnessing cancellations within queer, feminist, and trans communities. In these cases, the targets are not necessarily powerful individuals, and the sense of scale and context easily disappears. Cancellations can sometimes happen for relatively small things. And a troubling example of this is YouTuber ContraPoints, or Natalie Wynn, who is a white trans woman and has been widely praised for her snarky, smart, and visually cool analysis of the alt-right, Jordan Peterson, incels, J.K. Rowling, and gender-critical ideology, among many other things. She's even been credited with actually changing some alt-right supporters' minds with her videos through developing this ironic tone and visuals that are typical for online discussion forums, and actually aiming to understand the people and ideologies she critiques. Currently, ContraPoints has 1.77 million followers on YouTube, and she has told publicly that she's able to support herself with her YouTube and Patreon incomes. But in January 2020, ContraPoints posted a long video analysis of her own experience of being cancelled, or having the porn star and trans idol Buck Angel as a voiceover visitor on her video essay Opulence for 10 seconds. She was attacked by other Twitter users, most of them self-identified as trans and non-binary people, who called her a traitor for having associated herself with Buck, who in turn had voiced views which can be identified as true scum in internet lingo, or trans-medicalist. Now, true scum refers to a belief that only those trans people who experience gender dysphoria and want to medically transition are valid trans people, which of course leaves out a plethora of trans, non-binary, and genderqueer bodies and identifications. Now, Buck Angel is a white trans man in his early 60s, and just a glance at his Twitter and Instagram accounts will tell you quite clearly that this is indeed what he believes. But he's also a transgender legend. And the 10 seconds of his voiceover on the Opulence video are not about transness, but about him reading out a John Waters quote about how really bad taste is actually good taste. The video essay overall is a critique of discourses around wealth, class, economic inequality, and taste. And let's take a look now at this video clip that incited the cancellation of ContraPoints. Wait. No sound.
It's there's only three places. There's that. The bottom right hand corner of the screen mode, and there's also the maybe it's
Yes, that's fine.
Oh, it was muted for earlier, I think. Okay, we'll start over.
Okay.
Here we go.
Hey, how are you? I don't know. My philosophy of style is that people should wear what looks good to them. I was joking earlier when I said my look is bad on accident. I think my aesthetic is good. This is what looks good to me. So, and where other people might judge it. I like what John Waters said about there being good bad taste, bad taste.
One must remember, there is such a thing as good bad taste and bad taste. To understand bad taste, one must have very good taste.
I've wondered for a long time why I'm so attracted to bad taste. Like, I technically have the education to know better. I know about home rules, but I prefer Liberace. Why do I feel tacky? I think it's because I'm a transsexual, which lowers you at least a class. If you're born upper class and you're transsexual, you're middle class now, rich. If you were born middle class and you're transsexual, you are now lower class. And if you were born lower class and you're transsexual, ooh, sweaty, you'd better start a revolution. Marsha P. Johnson, how are you? Shit. With Brett.
All right. That was it. Sorry to the online participants who may not have heard, but you can check out the Opulence video. So as you can see from the video only, you would never even know who was speaking, who was reading out loud that John Waters quote. And in this clip, you can probably get a sense of the general tone of how ContraPoints performs if you are not familiar with her videos yet. But if you are interested in the further details of what happened next, I recommend that you watch the video essay Canceling by ContraPoints on her YouTube channel, because there is some quite rough language. There is just one screenshot from the canceling video there to give you an idea of what kind of language she was faced with during her cancellation. Now, on the video canceling, Natalie Wynn describes the devastating effect of cancellation herself like this, and I quote, "Look, I really don't like to represent myself as a victim, but in a way, leftist Twitter finally accomplished what 4chan, Nazis, stalkers, and TERFs have been trying and failing to do to me for years." End of quote. So there are several reasons why I started to think of such cases of cancellation through the notion of affective contagion. First of all, at a very simple level, as Natalie Wynn points out, the anger, the cancellation tends to spread somehow uncontrollably from the cancelled person to those associated with the cancelled person, like happened in her case. The cancellation spread to other influencers that she was associated with. And secondly, like in Wynn's comparison of 4chan to leftist Twitter, the type of discourse used in online cancel practices and just trolling is quite similar in terms of strong derogatory and shaming expressions. From the language, you cannot really actually tell whether these are trolls or activists. Now, Margaret Wetherell, in her critical examination of theories of affect, warns against understanding collective shifts of emotional atmospheres in terms of contagion or transmission, as if affective states were somehow floating and catching like viruses. Wetherell draws on Berlant, who points out how hard it is for academic scholars to understand that large-scale societal and political shifts are most often based on emotion, not on who has better arguments. Wetherell also draws on Sarah Ahmed in suggesting that affective transmissions, shifts, or contagions need to be understood through their sociocultural contexts as practices, not just happenings. Affective states and orientations are about turning away from some bodies and communities and towards others. They are felt reactions, yes, but they are not random. So what is the sociocultural context behind these contagions of rage? Trans people and the LGBT community at large are currently being bullied, trolled, and harassed by politicians, trans-exclusionary feminists, institutions, governments, platforms, and people. Being a target of harassment is enraging, but where can that rage go? It's most understandable that it has to go somewhere. And when the world at large is just not listening, the only ones who will listen are people within your community. But sadly, when the rage does go against our own, we are not necessarily making our communities better, safer, or more caring. There are and will be important disagreements which should not be ignored. But without attention to context and scale, those can really damage the actually important political struggles. So while the purpose of those who pointed out that Buck Angel is true scum was surely to protect trans and non-binary people from feeling invalidated, this claim to right of judgment based on vulnerability seems to have become entangled with rage, blowing out of proportion, pitting non-binary people against trans women in a nonsensical way, and in the process, the larger context disappeared from view. That cancellations within queer and trans counterpublics may play directly into the hands of powerful anti-LGBTQ forces that are gaining support in the US, in the UK, and elsewhere. Another key thing is also that in order to understand cancellation events as a part of broader affective and sociocultural shifts, we need to understand the effective economy of social media platforms, which thrive on conflict and cancellation. As Shoshana Zuboff argues in her 2018 book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, today's platforms and big tech companies function through monetizing our attention, monetizing our every move online. Affective reactions and intensity produce more traffic and therefore more money. Platform algorithms further lift up content that is receiving attention, since the platform economy does not care if the attention is negative or positive. Paradoxically, this also means that in the long run, key actors in cancellations might actually profit from it. Rebecca Lewis and Angel Christine, in their article on so-called platform drama, found that eventually many YouTubers who were at some point cancelled, and there are many at this point, actually gained followers over a longer period of time. And also the channels that commented on the cancellation profited from it. Lewis and Christine's study was based on interviews with content producers of so-called drama channels on YouTube, which are channels dedicated to reporting on YouTube celebrities, particularly scandals and conflicts. So in the short term, influencers involved in cancellations might lose a lot of followers, and YouTube might demonetize their videos for a period of time, meaning taking away revenue, ad revenue from specific videos. But in the long term, those videos and commentaries still receive a lot of views and traffic, and both the platform and the YouTubers involved profit from the cancellation process. This has led to a situation where many influencers currently are fabricating conflicts and cancellations. This, in fact, also raises the question whether expressions of rage in online cancellations are even rage. Whitney Phillips has argued in her book, This Is Why We Can't Have Nice Things, where she interviewed self-identified online trolls, that online aggressive behavior is not necessarily driven by genuine hate or anger or disagreement, but by a much more vague, but no less intense, longing for jolts and kicks, for feeling something, feeling other people react to you. So here, the strive for something effectively much messier than rage meets the earning logic of platforms. The effective economy of platforms is also meant to train us into longing for and needing those affective jolts. And another open question is if the flames of online rage in cancel events and otherwise are actually driven by people, or how much of the traffic is manufactured, driven by trolls or bots. What we do know is, for example, that the Russian government and certain alt-right organizations do very purposefully manufacture and use thousands of trolls to inflame online conflict, especially nationalist, anti-feminist, anti-gender, anti-queer, and anti-trans sentiments, in addition to inflaming things like war propaganda, because chaos serves the interests of the alt-right most often. Now, in cancel events, such as in the cancellation of ContraPoints, the cancelled people often try to change the course of the effective contagion by apologizing publicly. But like ContraPoints explains in her video Canceling, and like Lewis and Christine found in their study on cancelled YouTubers, public apologies do not usually work to soothe the situation. They are expected and demanded, but they tend to only fuel the cancellation further, as they are regularly seen as insincere. However, again, they do generate more attention and traffic. Lastly, I'd like to take a moment to think about how these effective contagions of cancellation might relate to the academia and those of us trained in feminist studies, queer studies, critical race studies, and other related fields examining social inequalities and transformation. Of course, we all want to think that our critiques are presented in a carefully justified and civil manner. But this cultural atmosphere of paranoia, surveillance, and ever-looming risk of conflict and cancellation raises questions on whether that paranoia is contagious and how critique is enacted today in a paranoid atmosphere. Many of us are trained in seeing the workings of power in minute details, what queer theorist Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick has called paranoid reading. Now, obviously, I'm not against critique, and in my scholarly opinion, a certain amount of paranoia is absolutely necessary to trace the often hidden, intricate, and complex networks of power that characterize our society and certainly characterize social media platforms. But somehow, such paranoid readings have now become so habitual, so mainstreamed, so real, that I've become increasingly wary of how easily they can turn counterproductive. Like the ContraPoints example shows, it can even be quite dangerous to read small details as signs of violent oppression. Now, my preliminary argument is perhaps a relatively boring one, that we need to understand cancel culture and affective contagions of rage through the complicated context in which they happen, including the dynamics of social media, and not discuss cancel culture as if it was all one thing. Here, I hope to have shown that when thinking about how to organize effectively and how to create queer and trans communities as communities of care, activism, and protest, calling for cancellations and deplatforming will most likely be counterproductive. In the contemporary attention economy, the strategy of creating attention where we do want it, for things that might offer hope and repair, can be much more effective, which is exactly one of the purposes of this seminar series. Another aspect of effective organizing is, in my view, to gather as much support as possible, not necessarily based on identity, but on common political aims, meaning that in the current situation, every well-meaning queer and trans ally should be welcome and indeed precious. But critiquing cancellation does not mean disagreeing well. I respectfully disagree with this slogan, which UCL has put a lot of effort into promoting. Although I do recognize that it's well-intentioned, and in principle, I would indeed rather challenge than cancel. But this slogan blatantly flattens the issues at stake, and it misses the point, since it focuses on how things are discussed, rather than the issues that are discussed. And here I also heartily agree with Deborah Shaw, who pointed out this very issue in the first talk of the seminar series back in February, talking about the debate between trans-inclusive and trans-exclusive feminists, that the debate too often focuses on the terms of the debate instead of its content. For example, it's not possible to disagree well about trans people's fundamental human right to exist and be recognized. Let me end by saying that although I've spoken about this dark side of queer and trans communities online, in general, I completely resent the image of feminist, queer, trans, intersectional thought, activism, or communities as unforgiving or constrictive or obsessed with cancellation. This is not my experience, although these things also exist. But these claims feel like looking in the mirror and seeing the face of a stranger. Here, I'd like to return to Munoz's concept of queer world making, which I started with. Now, the purpose of cancel practices might be a kind of queer world making, to keep our world safer, to keep our communities free from harassment, oppression, or harm, to imagine a world which actually functions on the terms of the marginalized and the oppressed, unlike the world at large. Only this world of peer surveillance has become too much of a mirror image of the world it was supposed to disassemble and build an alternate reality from. But like Munoz also emphasizes, there is no queer world making without risks. Thank you.